Hi everyone, Abdo here aka Ghoster, and today we decided to give you an intro to VR using Unreal Engine. Now I know a lot of you guys have been asking us to deliver part 2 of the Unreal Engine Portal tutorial, and that's coming along, I promise. But we wanted to get you started in something much simpler, much more comprehensible. There's going to be very minimal coding involved in this tutorial. So if we open up Unreal Engine and go to New Project, right away we notice in the templates, there is a virtual reality template. That's what we're going to use to get started, just to show you what's involved. Now you can use this in your projects. Let's call this project Intro to VR and hit Create New Project. Wait for Unreal Engine to launch. So when Unreal Engine opens, you can see this scene, which gives you basically two maps. The HMD plus motion controller, which is in this case what we want, with the you can see the hand controllers that get connected with the Vive or Oculus controllers. And you can use this option if you have a gamepad. Now we're going to use this option, and to access this map, it's actually related to a map. We can go here and then go to virtual reality, blueprints, and then maps, and then locate the motion controller map and double click that to open it. And then we have this map open. Let me jump into the Vive real quick just to show you guys how this works. Alright, right away we could see that our controllers are linked to these two hands. And when you click the controller, the hands make a fist to kind of grab objects. So let's test that out. Like, you can teleport as well. The teleportation capabilities are also available. So let's get closer to these and notice how when the controller or the hand gets closer to the cube, there's this animation of the fingers. That means I can grab the object and I can grab it. And the physics is enabled. You can do some juggling with this if you so dare. Obviously we have this pyramid which we can do crazy stuff to. So that's nice. Now how can we add our own objects to make them interactable? Simple. First, let me import these. Let's call this assets. So I have on my desktop previous assets we used in the stream. Some of them we haven't used yet, but I'm gonna be importing the baseball bat and the baseball textures just to have something on the scene to kind of play around with. So let me just import, drag and drop this in the assets folder and hit import, and then import the textures as well. It's going to take a moment. Perfect. Now that everything is imported, and now we have our bat, which we can use to interact with. I'll just go ahead and quickly set up the material for this bat from the textures we imported. So let's grab all of these and connect everything together. The height goes to the height, the normal to the normal. And then the last one is this, which is kind of interesting. This texture uses multi-channel texture stacking, basically, which is a feature that Substance Painter does. And we can cover how to achieve that in future tutorials. But right now I'm just going to connect the different channels to the prospective nodes here. One bonus fact which doesn't really relate to this video much is we have to change. This is a special texture, so we have to change a few parameters from color to linear color, and then go into the actual texture itself and disable in sRGB. That's something just you have to do for these kinds of textures, the occlusion, roughness, and metallic maps, to make sure your texture actually looks exactly the way you had it in the texturing software. Again, it's a little outside of this tutorial, so just do that, and I can always go through and make a video tutorial about that in the future. If you guys want it, let us know in the comments below. Right, so now the bat looks exactly how we want it to look. And it's in the scene. Obviously, it's not going to be interactable directly, right? I just dragged it to see it. So it's time to make this bat interactable with the scene. And to do that, we have to go dive in the blueprints that is set up in this template, in the VR template. Now, there are two ways to make any of your objects, your own personal objects, interactable in VR. And this has to do with this little blueprint called the BP pickup cube, which is all of these blue cubes you see here. So you can make any of your objects interactable by either duplicating this by hitting Control W or just right-clicking and doing duplicate, and then call this, for example, pickup bat. And let's go inside, double-click that, go to the Viewport tab, and let me just hit F to center the object in the screen. I'll reset the sizing by hitting this little yellow arrow. That's going to reset the sizing to 111. And then in the mesh, in the static mesh, let's type in bat, and that's going to give me my static mesh, which I just imported, the bat. Now let's just compile and save. And that's it. You can drag this blueprint in the scene, and it's going to do exactly that. It's going to be interactable. Another way we can do this before we jump into VR and test it out is if we go to the assets and then just right click and asset action and then create blueprints using this, and you can save it wherever. I'll just save it here in the blueprint next to the other one and hit OK. So it's going to open it for you. Now this method does take a few modifications. You could use any of the two methods depending on your case. Like the first method doesn't always work, so sometimes you could use this second method. And to do this, I'll open the pickup cube blueprint and then just copy everything from here and paste it in the blueprint of the bat itself. So this is a longer way, but it's also more flexible. So let's delete these and make the references to the same static mesh we have here. So just drag that inside, drop it in, and connect the two and just hit compile. And the last thing you want to do is you go to class settings and add an interface. Now they already added, like Epic already did this in the VR template. It's called pickup actor interface, and you want to add that to your blueprint and then just save. One more thing you need to do with the mesh, again, this is the longer way. You should hit simulate physics. And that's going to allow the object to be, to interact with the other objects when you're not carrying it around. And hit save. And I'm going to drag this into the scene. Now this is the blueprint from the second method, the longer method. Just rotate it around. And let's try this in VR. Alright, we are here inside VR. I have my controllers. Let me just teleport there. This works. Nice. Let's test this second one. This also works fine. They both work fine. And you can also interact with other objects. Let me just try. Get some fun out of this. So you could just, have this animation going on. Position myself, and then just all the cubes are gone. Okay, that's enough fun. Alright, so now we put all of that knowledge into use. In an ideal scenario, you would have already created a project, or you wanted to create a project based on a blank template. That's what we're going to do. We're going to create our bowling VR game based on a blank template. So let me rename that to bowling VR and then hit create project. Once we are inside, we can go to file, new level, and you can choose the template you want to use. There's a VR basic template if you want to just try out things. I'm going to use the default to start building our VR bowling application. So I'm going to start by scaling the floor up to a 5 by 5 by 5 and give it a texture. I like the pine wood in this case. And then we're gonna import our assets inside. Let me create a folder, call it assets. I'll import my assets from the folder. We're gonna be dragging the bowling.fbx and the bowling textures as well inside the asset folder. Once they're imported, let's go ahead and set up the material again real quick for this. Again, I'll just drag and drop these textures in, and then connect each one to the corresponding node. We'll probably do a tutorial about more in depth about the visuals inside Unreal Engine, but because I honestly think the material editor inside Unreal Engine is really good, and it would probably require a whole separate tutorial just to go through the basics. And I'm gonna uncheck the sRGB again for this specific texture and set up the simpler type to linear color again, and then hit save. Perfect. This is the point where we want to add our VR template, and to do that you gotta go here, add new, and then add features or content pack, and then you get the menu, and you can choose the virtual reality template and select add to project. And it's as quickly as that, it's added to your scene. To make this work, go to the virtual reality BP folder, then the blueprints, and the first thing you want to do is drag the motion controller pawn down to your scene. Now this is gonna be where your VR character is gonna start. The one thing you have to do is go to the auto possess player, select from the drop down menu and select player 0. And that's gonna make sure your player gets possessed so that it works properly. And if we test that out, the VR preview, there are controllers. We could move them in, but I'm pushing the trigger, but the animation is not working, and that's because the controls are not set up inside the input. So we want to set that up. Also, I'm clicking the thumb button, but it's not showing the teleportation for us. To set up the correct input controls, you go to Edit and Project Settings. If you scroll down the input, it's empty. Now you want to have a lot of bindings here. You can do import, but it doesn't work. It didn't work for me when I tried it. The way I did it was to go to navigate to your projects folder by clicking anything and just right-clicking any of the assets and then just show in Explorer, and it's gonna navigate you to the Documents, Unreal Projects, Bowling VR. This is our project. And inside the config, we have these 3 files, the default configuration files. We want to replace these with a project that already has VR implemented in it. Now, I already created a VR project before, so you could always start a new project based on the virtual reality template and then just save it. And you're going to have the controls saved as well inside the config file. We're going to take the default input, default game, and default editor, copy those, and replace them inside the Bowling VR config files. Paste those in, and just hit replace for all of them. You're not going to see the changes instantly, so you have to restart your project. Let me save everything before I restart. And save the level as Bowling VR. Once the project has fired back up, let's go to the content and open the map again. And if we go to Edits, Project Settings, then go to Input, the actions and the axis mappings are all mapped correctly. Now if you go and test that out, the controls should be able to work now. If I push the trigger, the animation is there. If I push the button, the teleportation is there, but it's not working correctly. That's because the level is missing a navmesh, and we want to set that up real quick. It's real simple to add that. Just type in the search navmesh and drag that and drop it to your level. Now, if you want to see how that looks, just hit the letter P on your keyboard. It's gonna output this little green area over here, showing anything green means that your character, whether it be third person or this virtual reality character, can actually teleport around and navigate. So let's scale that up a little bit. And if we test that out again, the teleportation actually works, but only you see that it's going over, so the teleportation only works inside the nav mesh and not anywhere outside. Set that up again just to scale it all the way. select the navmesh and scale it all the way as big as possible. Perfect. The navmesh is working. I'm going to hit P again to hide that. So let's import our assets inside the level. Let's first set up the interactions for both the ball and the pin. I'll use the blueprint from the virtual reality BP folder. Duplicate this twice and drag it to the assets folder and then just move there. So inside, again, do what we did before. Go to the viewport, select the mesh, reset the size, and then just drag our ball, in this case, inside and compile and save. Let's call this ball. Duplicate that, call it pin, and load the mesh inside by typing in pin. Perfect. Now, one important thing we want to see is, of course, the collision mesh on this ball and the collision mesh on the pins themselves. They're not going to be super accurate because Unreal Engine auto-generated these. If you double click on the mesh, you're going to be presented with the mesh viewer here. Let me zoom in a little bit. So the collision is this purple box or mesh around it, like the purple outlines around the mesh. It's not very spherical. It's not going to work for our application. We're going to delete that by going to the collision menu and then just remove collision, and then collision, and then add sphere simplified collision. You're not going to see anything because the sphere is actually has the exact diameter as our bowling ball here. To make sure it's there, down in the collision, there is the primitives and then the spheres. I'm gonna keep going through these, and then the radius, if we adjust that, that's our mesh. It was originally set up to almost 12, which is exactly the diameter of this bowling ball. Let's save that. We also want to preview the bowling pin collision mesh. So if we double click that and enable the collisions, it's a not very accurate collision box. To fix this, we can't do the primitives as before from the collision menu, but there is this feature called the convex decomposition. And if you hit apply with the default settings, Unreal is going to try to create a mesh or a collision mesh as accurately as possible, and you can see it. So if you want to preview that, let's go to the preview scene and then disable show environment and show floor, and disable grid head, and then enable wireframes. Now, yeah, it's very accurate, almost identical, which is exactly what we need here for our application. Now we can drag this in here and drag the blueprint ball in here as well. We could test this out quickly, but let me go to the top, make sure the pins are set up correctly. Here in Control W is going to duplicate, and you just hit. If you want to really make it accurate, you just go to Google Images and download the bowling pattern to kind of see where the pins are positioned next to each other, but I'm just going to estimate it here. The last thing we can add is just the basic cube and add it to the side here. I don't know why I added twice. I'll add this cube to the side and make sure our character starts closer to the ball. So I'll have the cube here just to position the bowling ball on top so that we don't have to reach down to the floor for them. If you hit the End key on your keyboard, it's going to make sure that the bowling ball sits exactly on top of whatever available mesh is there. In this case, our cube. Let me duplicate again, because I know I'm not going to make it from the first shot. There we go. Let's test this out and see how good it is so far. I'm going to hit VR player, just hit simulate and see if the physics. Oh, instantly we already see a problem. It seems the pin has a problem with the collision mesh. Let's double click at that. And sometimes the default settings may not be really good. In this case, they weren't. So let me up the accuracy, and for the sake of this application, let's just up the max health vertices as well, and then just apply. It should be much more accurate now. Let's try that out. Play. There you go. Now they're standard. There were two little vertices, so that the Unreal Engine couldn't really do well with the base of the pin here, but now it's working. Now that we have the simulation working fine, let's jump into VR and test the rest of the physics. Okay, inside this little bowling game, I'm noticing the pins are a little too close. I guess this is like the beginner mode in bowling, because I'm not that good in bowling in real life. Never played it. Maybe once. Let me grab a bowling ball and try to hit. Oh, that's not too bad. Okay. There you go. With the physics engine in Unreal Engine, it's handling things very well. A few things we might want to modify about the physics materials applied to each of these. If you want to modify the weights or the friction on any of these objects, let's do that as a bonus to this tutorial. If you double click on the mesh and then go to the details, down here scroll down all the way to the collision, there is a simple collision physical material tab with nothing applied to it. Let's create a new asset and call this ball physics and save that inside the assets folder. And then just select the physical material as a class for the material and then select. Now save that. You can see the ball physics material is applied here. And one setting you can change is the friction. You can play around with this to make the ball smoother or more harsh on the environment. And also the raise mass to power, which kind of controls the weight, and a bunch of other settings you can play around with to adjust the physical parameters of this object. You can do the same to the pin. One last thing I want to bring your attention to. If you select the nav mesh and hit P again, you can see that in this area the green is off. That's because there's a cube here and it has a collision enabled, so the nav mesh automatically deducts that from where you can move around the area. Again, setting up the level and working with the nav mesh may not be in the scope of this tutorial, but we can always cover those in a future tutorial. We've reached the end of this tutorial. I would love to see what you guys are working on. If you're building something in Unreal Engine or in Unity and want to show us, please do so in the forums. If you like this video and tutorial, please give the thumbs up and subscribe. If you don't, let us know down in the comments why you don't. Thank you for watching. It's been Abdo, over and out.